Our subject today is, what does personal growth look like? And so I have a book. It's called Cultivating Connection, a practical guide for personal and relationship growth in ethical non-monogamy. And so the topic comes up a lot about personal growth that needs to be done, especially when we're looking at like boundary issues. Somebody's upset with somebody, and we're doing that self-investigation, and we find out that we have internal work to do. Hi, John. Hi, Julia. Welcome. And so when we have that internal work to do, a lot of times the question comes up, how exactly do I do that work? What does that even look like? And so I've wanted to do this topic for a long time, and it's probably going to be a series of multiple. I mean, we're definitely not going to cover everything today. Um, so I've wanted to do this topic for a long time because when I was a young adult, I had grown up in a very abusive environment. I entered my young adulthood with a case of complex PTSD, um, daily passive suicidality with occasional active suicidality, some addiction issues. I was pretty non functional. I was getting fired from minimum wage jobs because I was just not functional. I couldn't show up on time. I had a surly attitude. It was my life was not functional, and I was very much not a happy person. And when I was 21, I started my healing journey, and I was also very poor, as you can imagine, since I couldn't hold down a minimum wage job. Hi, Kelly. Welcome. Um, Kelly's my wife. Um, I love her very much. Uh, so anyway, back to when I was 20. uh, so I was very poor and also pretty non-functional. And so I couldn't access mental health care very well. I got into a government subsidized group therapy program, and I did free self-help groups, and I read self-help books. And so I shaped a lot of my healing journey around this plan I managed to construct somewhere along the way of how to do my work. And so I was doing my work, and I would off and on over the years work with therapists to supplement my work. And so I've always thought of it that way. Um, so I've been wanting to do this topic for a long time to help people with self-directed work, whether it's because access to mental health care is sometimes very difficult for people to achieve, or if you're in a position, even though you could access mental health care, maybe all you really need or want is self-directed work. And so I've been wanting to cover this topic for a while. So that work, the way I conceptualize it. And please, ask questions anytime as we go. It'll show up on my screen. You'll see me do this as I use my trifocals to figure out what it says. But I'll try to answer questions as we go. So for me, that personal work, whether it's work that's self-directed or work that we're doing in therapy, it's all about trying to experience more joy, more love, more laughter, more peace, more ease, more companionship, and less stress, pain, internal torment, loneliness, and just life struggles and things like that. And so that's the whole point of therapy is to address those things. And so those things, um, I've got some notes here that I'm looking at. Um, those things are impacted by lots of stuff. I mean, the material world is a real thing. If a person is poor and struggling and unemployed, um, and just getting your basic needs met is hard, that's going to be the primary source of unhappiness, most likely. But there are other factors as well. If we have a strong community network or a strong family network, a strong chosen family network, strong relationships, then sometimes even those material struggles are less painful because we can access help and assistance through the people who care about us. And then when they are struggling, we can provide that support for them. So those relationships become a very important part of our happiness and peace. Um, and then there's our physical health. If we're in pain, it's, most people are grumpy when they're in pain. Most people struggle to be kind or struggle more to be kind when they're in physical pain. There's brain chemistry. That's a really important factor. If if our brain chemistry needs support, um, it's difficult to think positive thoughts. Um, it's difficult to feel good when our brain chemistry is not supporting that. There's also our personal history, which I'm going to ask us all to put later because we're gonna address the present first, and then we're gonna address personal history later. But personal history, especially if we have trauma, greatly impacts how we feel and how we experience our life. In addition to that, there's generational trauma, ancestral trauma, historical trauma, um, and current discrimination, othering, and systemic oppression that happens in the world. I'm going to separate those a little bit in that intergenerational trauma, ancestral trauma, they have a genetic component that quite literally, if our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents experienced trauma, it altered their genetic expression that then impacts literally our nervous systems before we're born. And then that impacts how we respond to our environment. We are primed. What's the difference between generational trauma and ancestral trauma? Um, hmm, that's a really good question, Tracy. I'm gonna kind of wing it because um, I'm not a really great, well-read expert on this, but I think when we talk about intergenerational trauma, we're simply talking about the genetic impact of if my parents had PTSD or complex PTSD or experienced trauma, it altered their genetic expression that then altered my genetic expression. And it doesn't necessarily include systemic trauma or systemic oppression or things like racism or things like that. And so I do have intergenerational trauma. My mother had a very abusive childhood. My father had a very abusive childhood. Um, my grandmother had a very abuse-filled life. I have no idea what happened in the generation of one more back from that. So there's intergenerational trauma in my family, but ancestral trauma is terminology that is much more often used for referring to things like the hundreds of years of racism that went into African Americans or Africans being brought over to the United States as slaves, and the trauma for hundreds of years passed down through that. The same similar ancestral trauma happening to Native Americans. And so that language is much more often used for things that are ancestral racially, whereas intergenerational trauma is just can happen in any group of people. I've kind of started using a term historic trauma for another thing that I haven't yet seen anyone write about, but I think it's there, and that's like when I was a young queer person and learning about the history of how LGBTQ plus people have been treated in the United States over the last 100 years, and me identifying with that group of people, I was then emotionally impacted by realizing I identify with this group of people. This group of people has been treated this way. These people are not my genetic ancestors. They're not my, they didn't impact my genetic expression, but I have, I've had an emotional response to realizing that the culture I live in sees me this way. So that's another thing that's probably not actually a term being used by other people out there. Um, I hope that answered the question. Uh, Please, by all means, continue looking into that if you want to. Um, um, Desiree B. Stevens does a lot of written work on uh, on systemic oppression, particularly well for all kinds of groups of people, but a lot for African Americans. Um, okay, So that history, then that impacts our mental and emotional well-being too. Thanks, Tracy. I'm glad that makes sense. Um, so then we've got our inner world, our thoughts, our feelings, the that can be anything from positive thoughts and feelings about ourselves to like complete inner torment about ourselves. And then our relationships can be a source of great joy or great pain. Um, and let's see, we talked about material resources first. So I talked about that first. Okay. So you've got all of these different things that can impact our positive or negative experience of life. And so one of the first things we want to try to do is just assess where we are at present. It's sort of our starting point. Um, Hello, Mr. Butterscotch. Great to see you here. Um, so we're starting right here in the present, right? Um, and actually, we're about 11 minutes in. So this is a great moment for me to just apologize to everybody for messing up posting the link. Um, Technology sometimes evades me, and I didn't quite do it right this time, even though I did it right a couple of months ago. So I'm sure I'll figure it out and I'll do it right before I do the next one. But you probably had to search a little bit to find the appropriate link, and I had to send it out this morning because I didn't send it out correctly yesterday. Okay, so I'm sorry for that. All right, so getting back to like just trying to assess where we are at present. This gives us a starting point. So um, since I don't know where you're at, I'm gonna, throw in a bunch of cautionary things like um, I'm gonna send out a bunch of cautionary things like if you're experiencing suicidality or you're struggling with that, um, it's important to try to access mental health care. And there are ways to access that um, that I'm losing my words at the moment, but we don't want to mess around with that. That's serious stuff. So I am going to try to keep this current assessment to the present day because not knowing where you're at, we don't want to go digging into the past because that can be really emotionally distressing, depending on what a person's history is. So you're just looking at the present, and the idea is to to think about these categories that we talked about: the material world, the relationships, um, your thoughts and feelings about yourself, um, your overall physical health. Most of us don't have an ability to really assess our brain chemistry without the help of a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist. So, just thinking about those categories of life and thinking only about the present, what are the parts of my life that are going well, that bring me joy, that give me feelings of peace and contentment? And then what are the parts of my life that may be causing me pain, stress, distress, anxiety, um, and things like that? And so as you sort of list these out, try to avoid falling into any like self-deprecating language or like attacking yourself. We're just trying to get a feel for what's going well in your life and what's not going well in your life. And if it starts to feel like everything's on the not going well and very few things are on the going well, make note of that and try not to judge it. Okay. Um, if you can access mental health care, this is a really good question to bring to your mental health care provider because, um, yeah, which part is so much easier said than done, Tara? I talked about several things there. Are you talking about trying to stay in the present, trying to not judge yourself? Um, I agree. Sometimes all of these things are easier said than done. Um, so the if you can take these questions to, yeah, not using self-deprecating. Yes, I totally understand that. Let me tell you, when I was 21 and starting my healing journey, I hated myself. I absolutely loathed myself. I have a painting that I did back then that I call self-hatred. Um, yeah, sometimes it's really hard. And the more we dislike ourselves and the more we use that self-deprecating language, the more likely we are to experience passive or active suicidality. So that's a very important thing we want to address. If you can access mental health care, this is a really good thing to bring to a therapist or a psychiatrist, okay? Because when we when we feel that way about ourselves, there's a lot of things that can contribute to that, and brain chemistry is a big part of it. If our brain chemistry is does not support joyful, happy thoughts, it's really hard to think them, no matter how hard you try. So that I may not be able to explain this super well, but I'm going to try. There's clearly an interplay between brain chemistry can contribute to negative self thoughts and self feelings, but then there's actions we can do that can contribute to improving brain chemistry. So if you're experiencing some of this self directed negativity, but it's not super strong, it's kind of mild, then it's very likely that we can turn it around with behavioral exercises and thought exercises. But if it's moderate to strong, these are really good things to take to a psychiatrist, psychiatric nurse practitioner, psychotherapist for assessment, because it would be really important to tease out: are we looking at depression? Are we looking at maybe a mood disorder that is sometimes depression and sometimes not? Because that's a whole different set of pharmaceuticals. Um, or are we looking at maybe there's an ADHD issue, and then not having coping skills for that, we feel bad about ourselves because we're not able to get things done and do things. And so then that's contributing to depression. So there's like multiple possible things here that I obviously can't cover in this format. But having a skilled psychotherapist or psychiatrist to go through the assessment questions with you to help you narrow down: is it possibly depression? Is it possibly a mood disorder? Having PTSD and complex PTSD almost always comes with depression, um, and not liking ourselves. Um, and let's see, what else was I going to say there? And then there's ADHD can contribute to also having depression. And so assessing whether or not that those depression symptoms, I'm going to call them depression symptoms, even though they can be several different things, um, assessing whether or not it's severe enough that you really need some pharmaceuticals on board, because you have to get the mood lifted somewhat for the behavioral stuff we're going to do to be able to take hold and work. And so if you're anxious about pharmaceuticals, or you don't trust them, or you don't feel good about them, that again is great things to bring to your therapist. So just talk about your feelings about pharmaceuticals. I've talked to a number of people over the years who they just they didn't feel comfortable with pharmaceuticals. They'd known other people who took psychotherapeutic drugs and either ended up feeling numb, or maybe they got worse, or and so it only takes one or two experiences like that, where you've had a friend or a relative or a partner that had a negative experience with a pharmaceutical to make us cautious about pharmaceuticals. And so talking to an expert about those pharmaceuticals is really important. For example, like let's say you have some moderate to severe depression symptoms, and you're talking to a psychiatrist about those depression symptoms. Okay. If you've known someone who's had a negative experience, like, for example, I think we've all heard in the news back 10, 15 years ago when they first started giving Prozac to teenagers, that a lot of the teenagers had an increase in suicidality. Prozac was a very new drug back then. And so one of the first things you might want to ask a mental health practitioner is: which pharmaceuticals have been around for a really long time, which means we are likely to know what kind of side effects might happen, and which ones are new. Because sometimes people want to try the new stuff because it's like, ooh, it's new and improved and the latest thing. But sometimes people want to go the safe route and say, this is a drug that's been around for a really long time. We all know what the likely side effects are, so we know what to look out for. One of the things to look out for is that some people do well on SSRI. No, wait, am I saying that right? Some people do well on the selective serotonin uptake inhibitors, the older style antidepressant drugs, and that's great. They do well on those. I did well on those. Some people have a very negative reaction to that, and so that's something that if you've never taken one of those classes of drugs before, you're going to want to work with. I recommend you work with a psychiatrist rather than your general doctor because there are a handful of people who have a negative reaction to that, just like the teenagers in the newspaper articles had to Prozac. And and if you feel any increase in depression symptoms, suicidality, negative self-thoughts, you want to call up whoever prescribed this to you, get an emergency appointment, tell them that your symptoms are getting worse because they're not supposed to get worse, and they will most likely take you off that class of drugs and try you on a totally different class of drugs. Um, so um, when we're talking about brain chemistry, working with a mental health professional is really important. If you can't access a mental health professional, um, well, there are ways to act. I hope. I don't know. I wish we had a more smooth, easy to access, comprehensive medical and mental health care system. We don't. Um, so if you need pharmaceuticals or if you think you might need pharmaceuticals, please work with the mental health professionals and get appropriate assessments and appropriate follow-up care. Okay. So since that's not really in my wheelhouse because psychotherapists at a master's degree level, we don't prescribe anything. Um, Doctors, psychiatrists, psychiatric nurse practitioners, and sometimes our general physician prescribe these kinds of drugs. And they are the people to talk to. They are the experts on these drugs. Um, okay, given all that, the next step is let's assume that you're getting that help somewhere else. But keep in mind that your brain chemistry can affect your mood. And if you're trying all of these other things, um, the behavioral things to help your mental health and it's not working, that may be a sign that you really need to talk to somebody about some possible pharmaceuticals. If for no other reason to give you the bump up to have the positive effect with the behavioral stuff. And then, when you've reached a level of stability that you can start talking to the doctor about coming off those drugs, you can come off those drugs. Maybe. Okay. So the other thing I said was just sort of make a list of what things are bringing you joy in your life, what things are going well, giving you feelings of peace, giving you feelings of belonging and contentment and companionship, and what things in your life are causing you pain, causing you stress, causing you anxiety. And that's going to be our beginning list of things to start working on, things to start assessing. And the list of things that bring you joy and happiness, that's really important because you want to give those things more attention. It's extremely it's just extremely common that we have a tendency to look at the things that are causing us pain, think of these as problems that need to be fixed, and that's where all our focus goes. And then the things over here that are giving us joy, they don't get the time and attention that they deserve. So one of the ways of increasing joy and happiness in our lives is to recognize the things that give us joy and happiness and work on increasing those things. So if you have friends or even a friend that you really enjoy their company and you enjoy what they've added to your life, then you want to spend more time with them if you can, or express to them your appreciation for the relationship. Work on building and strengthening that relationship. If you enjoy a hobby, whether it's golf or painting, I said golf. Can you believe I said golf? um, Bicycling, spending time in nature. If you have a hobby you enjoy, don't let that be the thing that gets cut out as soon as your life gets more stressful. Um, if, sorry about that. Um, I should, sorry, I'm going to put my phone on do not disturb. Um, okay. So then the things that are causing us pain, you're going to want to look into that a little bit more. What kind of emotions are you feeling with that pain? Is it anxiety? Is it sadness and depression? Is it grief? Is it self loathing? Is it loneliness? What kind of emotion are you experiencing with that pain? And that starts to really give us an idea of what to work on. So we can break down each of those, right? Um, if it's anxiety, ask yourself, what do I think is the source of my anxiety? Because what you think is the source of your anxiety may not actually be the source of your anxiety, but it gives you a starting place. What do I think is the source of my anxiety? And how does it affect my life? How does it impact my life? And for that, you're probably going to be looking at changed behaviors like am I am I afraid to go out at night? Or am I afraid to pursue the career I want? Or do I don't leave my house? What how does the anxiety impact your life? Okay. With sadness or grief, what is the thing that you feel sad about? You know, and try to keep it in the present as much as you can because grief is often, things from the past and can be the distant past. And we're not digging into the past yet. Digging into the past is going to happen after we build up your strengths. Right now, we're just sort of doing an assessment of what it is you might want to work on. Um, a certain kind of sadness is loneliness, which indicates that there are issues in our relationships. We are very social creatures. We need human contact and companionship, and so we need to look at what relationships do we have relationships that give us any joy, companionship, or ease and peace. Or do we have relationships in our life that are causing us a lot of turmoil, or are we lacking relationships in our lives? Those are different kind of things. If you have relationships in your life that are causing you turmoil, then our first step is probably to assess those relationships and work on improving those relationships. And that's a lot of relationship skills and interpersonal skills. Um, if we're looking at an absence of relationships, then we're going to be looking at um, finding and creating relationships. And so we may find that this starts to become sort of a web of issues, right? A lot of times when there's just an absence of relationships, there's also anxiety, like social anxiety that's keeping us from getting out there and meeting people, talking to people we don't know, and creating relationships. So there's a connection there, right? Um, if let's see, I was talking about sadness. Okay, so hold on, I have a question. Would you say that much of our mental health issues stemmed from disconnection? We're supposed to be an interdependent, touchy-feely species, and we've just veered way far away from that. Yes. Thank you, John. I wasn't planning on doing commentary on our overall social structure, but yes, as as a as a I don't want to say a culture because this country that we live in, I'm assuming everyone here is in the United States. This country we live in um, hasn't done well with connection for a long time, but it's gotten really, really increasingly worse since the advent of the internet, I think. Um, people people can have some online connection, but it's not the same as face-to-face interaction with the whole touchy-feely thing. Um, but if we go back even far from that, not from the US, but the same from where I am. Okay, thanks, Taryn. Um, but even before that, people were really, really divided. I mean, I grew up in the 1970s, and and people were really divided. And a lot of how the United States works is by dividing people. We have we have an economic system that is built on it's kind of like a pyramid scheme where it filters resources and wealth from the bottom and the middle up to the top. And the way that the people at the top keep us from revolting is they put a lot of effort into the kind of propaganda that keeps us divided. And so they keep us divided on gender, patriarchal people, traditional people versus people trying for gender equality. They keep us divided by sexual orientation and all the things they call the culture war. They keep us divided by race. They keep us divided by income status. They keep us divided by religion. And they're just constantly working to keep us divided and more and more and more fragmented. And so, um, even before the internet, there was a lot of fragmentation based on those things. We also have a culture that doesn't teach people to talk about our feelings. They teach us instead to voice our judgments. And so, one of the first things that happens, like I remember this very clearly, even from back in the 70s. My grandmother, who was born in the 1910s or 1920s, I think. No, wait, yeah, she was born in the 1910s. Um, if she felt a distressing emotion about something, she was very unlikely to say, I feel upset. I feel angry. And she was much more likely to say, that person was wrong. You know, I don't believe in what those people believe in. And she was likely to express her feeling in the form of a judgment against someone else. And as soon as we express a judgment against someone else, they feel judged, and then there's a division created between the person speaking and the person that's being spoken about. And so just the way we speak about each other and our feelings divides us even further. Um, and so then the advent of the internet, where um, people communicate more online and stay more isolated in their homes. And lots of people feel absolutely entitled to be fucking dickheads on the internet and just be mean to each other for no reason. Like just on my social media, I've had people ask me rude questions and I just delete, delete, delete. But um, yes, so part of it is that we're divided. And when when a human brain is not getting the kind of connection and interaction with other humans that we need, then that's going to increase feelings of anxiety and depression and all of that stuff. So that's a very good question. Thank you, John. Um, Now, where was I before that? Also, I want to ask, since I've got 11 of you on here. I've gotten some advice that people will be more likely to want to attend something like this if they know that it's a shorter period of time, like 30 minutes, or maybe at the most 45 minutes. And I've advertised these as being an hour long, which if somebody only had a 1 hour lunch break, it would take up their whole lunch break. So if you wouldn't mind, um, you could just hit a heart if you would like to see these online classes, whatever we're going to call these live events, being like 30 minutes. If you or you could put a comment and say what would you prefer. So I'd really appreciate it if you would like just express that for me so I could get a feel for what to do on the next one. So getting back to um, our feelings, we talked about some loneliness there. Um, Now let's start talking about, okay, Tara says 1 hour works for them. Now let's start talking about that self-loathing, that self-deprecating language. John says he's good for an hour. Uh, Tracy says they prefer an hour or 45 minutes. 30 minutes feels too short for some of these topics. I agree. Okay. Um, that said, I could try really hard to make sure that we had some good useful takeaways for some of this. And this is going to be a series, so we're just getting started with the sort of self-assessment stuff. Um, so um, the self-deprecating language and that sort of thing. So we've got the things that can contribute to the painful aspects of life, brain chemistry, our own internal thoughts that can sometimes be tormenting, uh, physical health. I meant to mention this one earlier. I don't think I did. Um, Physical health, brain health, they're technically the same thing because our brains are actually part of our bodies. But um, also, we can think of that as a little bit separate. Um, if a person has chronic pain, I have chronic pain. Right now, I'm sitting here with a pretty moderate headache, and that's possibly related to some arthritis in my neck from neck issues and stuff. Um, Chronic pain can make a person grumpy, and that grumpiness can have a cascading effect. Um, but it also works the other way around. When a person is depressed, there's lots of evidence that their perception of physical pain or their actual physical pain increases. So it could have, I think it has to do with inflammatory things circulating through the body. So these things are connected, and physical pain, physical health issues. I've had chronic medical issues in my life, um, worrying about my long-term physical health or my life longevity because of serious medical issues can add a lot of stress to a person's life, can add to depression and worry about um, how is my quality of life going to be 5, 10 years down the road. John says chronic pain can exhaust you and exacerbate mental health symptoms, and that's been your experience. Yeah. And so, keeping in mind that all of these things interact with each other. And so, if there are medical issues, then making sure you take as good of care of yourself and try to resolve those medical issues if possible is really important because they do negatively impact our mental health. If they can't be resolved, if it's something that we just have to find a way to live with, then working on acceptance and self compassion is really important. Working on building those community supports so that we can get assistance from other people is really important. Um, and then with the mental health symptoms, same thing. Try to do as much as we can to support our brain chemistry and our mental health, because it does cascade and impact everything else. Um, so getting back to those thoughts and feelings, um, keeping an eye on how the brain chemistry can impact that, how the physical health can impact that, how the outside stressors can impact that. I mean, if I remember one of the things that I read a long time ago was that back in 1929, 1930, when the stock market crashed and we had the beginning of the Great Depression, there was a huge increase in depression, stress, anxiety, and suicides. And and what was interesting reading about it many years later was that sometimes people, and maybe it's because we have such an individualistic society, sometimes people frame these things as individual problems. The stock market crashed. I've lost all my financial well being. Um, I feel bad about myself, like it's a personal failure. And then there's an increase in suicidality. Or as the Great Depression wore on and people were not able to get jobs for years and years, and then their families fell into poverty, or they themselves fell into poverty, or they became unhoused, or things like that. Um, People would had a tendency to interpret it as a personal failure. And so, one of the things that I encourage people to do if they're being impacted by stuff going on out there in the world, if you're a person who has lost your job because the current administration has cut hundreds, I don't know how many jobs, thousands and thousands of federal jobs, and you've either lost your job directly or your employer or your business has taken a nosedive because it was somehow related to these federal programs. Um, that's not a personal failing. That's happened because of something that's way outside of your control. And so doing that mental exercise to notice that this to shift this from this is a personal failing to this is something outside of my control, or what I like to call beyond my pay grade. That's important. I mean, thousands of trans people who have built their lives, who have built their careers in the military, are being forced out, and being forced out in the worst possible way right now. Being forced out with, I forget what the code is called, but it's similar to what we call the dishonorable discharge back when I was in the military. Back when I was in the military in the early 80s, um, um, just being gay was enough to get you forced out of the military with a dishonorable discharge. And what that meant was, it was a mark on your record, um, similar to being found guilty of a federal crime. And so you couldn't get a job that required any kind of trust. You couldn't get a job with a security clearance, or a job that where you were entrusted with someone else's money, or there were just, there was a lot of impact. You couldn't get a job as a public school teacher. Um, and that's what's happening to trans people being forced out of the military right now. So, of course, these things are going to impact how a person feels. Making that shift and making sure you recognize when these things are not a personal failing, but something that's happening at a level above your ability to influence it. It's outside of your control is really important. The economy has not been doing that great in the last 6 months. There's been a lot of uncertainty in all kinds of markets. My business took a downturn in the first 6 months, and I had to remind myself multiple times, because there is a strong tendency to think of it as a personal failing. I had to remind myself multiple times that my business was being impacted by the uncertainty being created by what was happening at the federal level. And and so my business is no longer suffering, but it was for a few months there. And I had to do that mental work too, because just like everyone else, my first instinct was to think, what am I doing wrong? Right. So um, Kelly says she appreciates this perspective. Thank you. And it's important. So that's so okay. We were talking about the self-deprecating thoughts, and there's a number of things that we can do for that. And one of the first ones, Tracy says, I appreciate that too. I've been unemployed for several months and it's really hard. It is. It's really hard. I'm sorry that you're going through that. Um, okay. So I was going to say something about, and I love these moments where it's like I have a thought and then I forget what it is. I was talking about the perspective. Oh, self-compassion. Okay. Self compassion is one of the most important first steps we can take to start turning around those self loathing kinds of thoughts. So there's a really good YouTube video by Kristen Neff, Kristen with a K. Neff is Neff, and it's on self compassion. And I think the title is something like "Self Compassion is More Important Than Self Esteem" or something like that, but it'll be easy to find. And after this live, I'll post a link um, in one of the comments, so that you can find it. Practicing self compassion is one of the most important things we can do for our mental health, because there is so much that impacts us that is beyond our control. And there are some people out there, I can almost feel you. Those of you with with anxiety, that are like, your anxiety is already ramping up because the thought of something being outside of your control increases your anxiety. I hear you. I see you. I've been there. Okay, so try to go with me, because I understand your anxiety, and at the same time, if a person is struggling with self-loathing and a lot of self-deprecating thoughts, like not self-deprecating like in the humble way, but self-deprecating like in, I hate myself, I'm a failure, I should do better, I should be able to do better, those kinds of thoughts. then what these people need is self-compassion. So here's one of the fallacies that I hear all the time. A lot of times when we have these really uh, painful self-critical thoughts, it's because we think that we need them to motivate ourselves to get up off our butts and do something. And that if we could just motivate ourselves to get up off our butts and do something, then we would feel better about ourselves, right? Achievements lead to self-esteem. And this is why Kristen Neff's TED Talk on self-compassion is so important, because she explores all of that stuff about self-esteem and shows that self-compassion is much more effective in helping us to feel better about ourselves than self-esteem. Self-esteem is always a measurement on a failure to success scale. And when that's what it is, some people are going to measure as success and some people are going to measure as fail, and those people are just doomed if that's the only way we can feel good about ourselves. Self-compassion, on the other hand, is expressing compassion for ourselves that we're struggling, expressing compassion for ourselves that we're not good at something, because we can't all be good at everything. Okay. Take, for example, I'm really good at being a therapist. I'm really good at this, the talking stuff. I'm not great with technology, as those of you who had to search for the link today have figured that out. I will get better at it. It's one of those things that takes like multiple times for me to learn something. And and anyone who knows me well knows that I have experienced a lot of struggle with my feelings about myself when I struggle with technology. And it's the kind of thing that it doesn't typically affect me, but it does where technology is concerned. And it's the I'm trying to do something with technology. It's hard and I don't understand it. And then I have this wave of shame that just washes over me, and these thoughts that like I must be stupid. And I know I'm not stupid. I know I'm really smart. I'm even good at math, but I'm not good with computers and technology. So that wave of shame is really emotionally distressing. And if I let the self critical voice come in and say, you should be better at this, that just makes it feel worse. But if I embrace self compassion in that moment and I say, hold on, and I take a deep breath, and then I say, I totally understand why you feel this way. I'm saying this to myself. I totally understand why I feel this way. Not knowing how to do something is hard. When something's not easy, it's hard, and that hurts. And it's easy to think negative thoughts about myself. But it's not fair to think negative thoughts about myself. I don't deserve that. Take a deep breath and either take a break or try again or get help. So, and that's just one example, right? A person can have those kinds of um, painful thoughts about themselves under lots of circumstances. But what I'm trying to illustrate is just this is one example of when it affects me. And going and watching this YouTube video of a TED Talk on self compassion, and then start a daily exercise of self compassion. Okay. Which brings me to the second thing. And so these are the two things I'm going to leave you with today for things to help get you started on improving how you feel about yourself. The first one is the self compassion piece. The second one is journaling. So lots of people journal, lots of people don't journal. It doesn't have to be in written format, but it's an important exercise. And I'm going to explain why it's an important exercise. It's an important exercise in that if you don't already have a compassionate, a self compassionate um, exercise that you do that is inner dialogue, you with yourself, then it's something that you need. It's the ability to talk to ourselves in a way that's compassionate about this is what I've experienced in my life. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. And I'm going to approach this with myself as though I am my best friend or I am um, my own child. I am someone that I love and care about, and my goal is to help them. Journaling is not about being self critical or harsh with ourselves. It's about that expressing that self compassion, but also creating an inner dialogue about what's going on in our lives, what we're experiencing, what we're thinking, and what we're feeling. That inner dialogue becomes really, really helpful as we move forward doing this work in more and more detail. And so, what I'm going to be breaking it down into as we go are things like what if it's anxiety? What if it's depression? What if it's probably PTSD? Um, and so we're going to address it in those different ways. Um, on the next one, I think we're going to focus a lot on building strengths and fostering that positive sense of self. But for right now, these are the two strengths or the two techniques that I want you to use to work on increasing those inner strengths. Practicing self compassion and journaling, and practicing the self compassion while journaling. Um, but the self compassion is something you can practice throughout the day. Anytime you express a painful thought about yourself or you feel a painful feeling about yourself, like that wash of shame that comes over me when I'm struggling with technology, um, or the painful thought, I must be stupid if I can't do this. This should be easy, kind of thing. And so you can each one of those is an opportunity to practice self-compassion. Now, if you have those kinds of painful negative self-thoughts or self-feelings many, many times per day, it's going to be hard to catch them all every day. So I wouldn't overwhelm yourself with trying to catch it every single time. I would say if you have lots and lots of these painful thoughts and feelings, then practice the self-compassion when you can, when you can manage to muster up the spoons, when you have the time and energy. And all it is you catch the painful thought and you stop and you go, okay, hold on. That's a very critical thought. Let's express some self-compassion. And then just as if you're talking to your friend, you say to yourself, I completely understand why I feel this way. I have a lot of compassion for myself for feeling this way. I'm really sorry that you're experiencing this to yourself. Um, and the same with the painful thoughts. Um, and there's more to it, and you'll see that when you watch the TED Talk. So the journaling then comes in. I always liked to journal at night because it's like it's at the end of the day, and I was going to journal about what had happened to me during that day. Some people they're just not good at it, or they're too busy in the evenings, um, and so they prefer to journal in the morning or during their lunch break, or whenever works for you. Um, so what I would do, because I was journaling in the evening, is I would reflect on the day and I would reflect on not the journaling is not meant to be a list of what I did today. Um, I imagine that would get boring for people pretty quickly. So instead, um, I think it's more fruitful when you're reflecting on the day to journal about what distressing feelings did I have today? What distressing interactions with other people did I have today? And also sometimes what were the good things that happened today? Maybe I need to pay more attention to those, write them down, celebrate them, and let myself really think about them again so that they get stuck in long-term memory. Because if you don't think about them more than once, they tend to be forgotten. Um, and then when focusing on the painful thoughts and feelings I had that day, or the painful interactions I had that day, um, writing about them with self compassion is really important. And then, um, if you've read my book, you might want to use the personal responsibility flow chart and some techniques like that to help you work through those things. But we're going to get into those kind of techniques more as we go. I'm going to try and do these lives on Mondays, so keep your eyes out for the next notice for the next one on the next Monday coming up. We've got 5 minutes. So if any of you need to go, I understand. But if you want to ask any questions in the last 5 minutes, this is a great time to do it. And but I also need to have something to talk about while I'm waiting for those questions to come in, because otherwise you're just going to be staring at me. So let me see. What else is there to talk about? Um, okay. So here's a question. Oh, thank you for doing this. Thank you, Tara. I appreciate you. Thank you for showing up. Um, let's see. I was just looking at the notes to see if there was anything else to. Oh, so, um, John, yes, yes, this is being recorded. It'll take at least an hour or so for the Substack app to create the recording, but then the recording will be posted on my Substack and it will be available to everyone for free. Um, okay, so with 4 minutes left, and I'm gonna try and fill the air so that people can ask questions if they want to. Um, let's see, maybe I can talk a little bit about building strengths, and creating new ones. So remember earlier on when we were talking about just making the list of the things that are going well in your life, the things that bring you joy, the things that give you feelings of peace or connection or community. Um, those there are strengths embedded in that that you already have. And so another thing that you can do with that list is go back through that list and ask yourself, how do I contribute to this thing in my life? And if you have a lot of self negative thoughts, this can be a difficult exercise because we have a tendency to negate our positive traits when we're struggling with negative self thoughts. Um, and we magnify our negative self traits and we minimize our attributes. But if you look at the things that are positive in your life, ask yourself, or try to answer the question, what do I do that contributes to these things? Like if you've built a pretty strong community and there are people out there who have been showing up to help you with things, then you must be doing something because people are showing up for you. Um, and it could be your sense of humor. It could be that you show up for them. It could be that you just put yourself out there over and over and over again. Um, but you're doing something that's causing people to show up for you. If if uh, if maybe you don't have very many friends, but you have one really good relationship, then you must have some relationship skills that are going well in your relationship. If maybe you don't have good relationships in your life, but you enjoy your own company, there's something positive there because you're not disliking yourself so much that you can't stand to be by yourself. Um, so look at those things that are giving you joy and peace, and ask yourself, what am I doing that's contributing to that in my life? Even if it's just a hobby that you enjoy, um, like running, then you've got the self discipline to keep showing up to do the running. You know, maybe you don't have other relationships in your life. Maybe you've got other lots of things on the negative list. But if you've got something that's actively bringing you joy, you are contributing to that thing existing in your life somehow. And then another thing you can do with that list of positives is not just how do I contribute to that existing in my life, but what does that positive thing in my life contribute to me? And there's a whole lot of things that you can list with that. I've reached 1 o'clock. I've managed to fill the time, so I'm going to let y'all go. Thank you so much for showing up. Please go to the Substack, give me lots of comments, tell me what it is you want to hear. Anything that you may want to hear that you didn't hear today, things you want me to add to the next one, please let me know. I look forward to seeing you next week.